Imagine a woman who didn't hesitate to poison her own husband to secure power, who manipulated the politics of an entire empire to place her son on the throne. This woman was Agrippina the Younger, one of the most ambitious and feared figures of ancient Rome. Her story is a blend of cunning, cruelty, and determination. Are you ready to discover the secrets behind her rise to power? Agrippina the Younger was born into one of Rome's most powerful families, the Julio-Claudians. She was the niece of Emperor Caligula, sister of Claudius, and mother of Nero, but she refused to be merely a spectator to history. With limitless ambition, Agrippina fought to ensure her son would become emperor, even if it meant eliminating every obstacle in her path. Today, we'll dive into the life of this woman who defied the norms of her time and became one of the most influential figures in the Roman Empire. Did you know that many historians believe Agrippina wielded more actual power than some of the emperors themselves? While women in ancient Rome were expected to remain in the background, Agrippina maneuvered through political intrigue with remarkable skill, appearing on Roman coins alongside her son Nero, an unprecedented honor for a woman in Roman society. Her calculated partnerships, strategic marriages, and ruthless elimination of rivals paint the portrait of a woman determined to succeed in a world designed to exclude her from power. The imperial court trembled at her influence as she orchestrated the fall of enemies and the rise of allies with deadly precision. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to the Legacy of Empires channel and don't miss a single episode. In our journey through the ancient world, few stories capture the essence of power and ambition quite like that of Agrippina the Younger, a woman who changed the course of an empire through sheer force of will. Agrippina was born into a world of intrigue and power. Few families in history have wielded as much influence as the Julio-Claudians of ancient Rome, and Agrippina found herself at the very heart of this dynasty. As the daughter of Germanicus, a military hero worshipped by the Roman people, she wasn't just any noble child. She was destined for greatness from the moment she drew her first breath. Imagine growing up in the shadow of the imperial palace, where every whispered conversation could determine the fate of millions. This was Agrippina's reality. Her childhood was not filled with games and carefree days, but with lessons in politics, influence, and survival. She watched carefully as power changed hands, sometimes peacefully, often violently. Germanicus, her beloved father, was not just any general. He was Rome's golden boy, adored by the legions and celebrated by the common people. His military campaigns in Germania brought him fame and adoration, but they also painted a target on his back. When Agrippina was just a child, her father died under mysterious circumstances in Syria. Many believed he was poisoned on the orders of the Emperor Tiberius, who feared Germanicus's popularity. This early tragedy taught Agrippina a brutal lesson. In Rome, popularity could be as dangerous as it was useful. She learned to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics, watching her mother Agrippina the Elder stand defiantly against the emperor after her husband's death. For her courage, the elder Agrippina was eventually exiled and starved to death. Another harsh lesson for the young girl about the price of direct confrontation with power. From these experiences, Agrippina developed a keen understanding that in Rome, power was never given. It had to be seized, and she was determined to do whatever it took to secure not just her own position, but that of her family. This wasn't mere ambition, it was survival. As she grew into a young woman, Agrippina's lineage became her greatest asset. She was the great-granddaughter of Emperor Augustus himself, niece to Emperor Caligula, and sister to the future Emperor Claudius. Royal blood flowed through her veins, and she knew exactly how to use this advantage. Did you know that Agrippina wrote her own memoirs? This remarkable fact tells us volumes about her self-awareness and strategic thinking. Unfortunately, these writings have been lost to time, but historians believe they would have revealed fascinating details about her life and political strategies. Just imagine what insights we might have gained from reading the personal thoughts of one of Rome's most calculating minds. These memoirs would have been extraordinary not just for their content, but for their very existence. Few women in ancient times documented their lives in such a way. This alone speaks to Agrippina's understanding of her historical importance and her desire to control the narrative of her life. Agrippina's rise wasn't just about her heritage, though. She possessed a remarkable intelligence and a ruthless pragmatism that set her apart. While other noble women might have been content with marriage and motherhood, Agrippina saw these as merely tools to achieve greater power. She understood that in a world designed by and for men, she would need to be twice as clever and 3 times as determined to make her mark. And make her mark she would. The young woman who had learned the harsh lessons of imperial politics at her father's funeral would go on to become one of the most powerful women Rome had ever seen. Her story is a testament to the fact that, in the ancient world, power rarely came to those who waited patiently for it. Agrippina wasn't just ambitious. She was revolutionary in her understanding that a woman could shape the destiny of an empire. In ancient Rome, marriage wasn't just a union of hearts, it was a political weapon, and Agrippina wielded it masterfully. She wasn't merely intelligent, she was a strategic genius who understood that in Roman society, her marriages were the most powerful tools at her disposal. Agrippina's first strategic alliance came in the year 15 after Christ, when she was just 14 years old. She married Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a man chosen not for love, but for advantage. Ahenobarbus was enormously wealthy and well-connected, descended from one of Rome's oldest and most prestigious families. But let's be honest, he wasn't exactly husband of the year material. Historical accounts describe him as cruel, dishonest, and morally corrupt. When congratulated on the birth of his son, the future Emperor Nero, Ahenobarbus reportedly remarked that nothing but detestable could come from him and Agrippina. Despite her husband's character flaws, this marriage served Agrippina's purposes perfectly. It elevated her social standing, expanded her wealth, and most importantly, gave her a son who carried the bloodline of the imperial family. Nero was her ultimate investment in the future, her living claim to power. What's particularly fascinating is how Agrippina navigated the dangerous waters of imperial politics during this time. When her brother Caligula became emperor, Agrippina found herself in a precarious position. Caligula was notoriously unstable and viewed potential rivals with murderous suspicion. Agrippina was implicated in a conspiracy against him and exiled to the tiny island of Pontia in the year 39. For a woman accustomed to the luxury and intrigue of Rome, this remote island prison must have been a special kind of torture. But fortune favors the patient. When Caligula was assassinated and her uncle Claudius became emperor, Agrippina's exile ended. She returned to Rome, now a widow after Ahenobarbus's death from edema, ready to play the next move in her grand strategy. And what a move it was! After carefully maneuvering herself into Claudius's inner circle, Agrippina accomplished something truly extraordinary. She convinced the emperor to marry her, his own niece. This was no small feat, as Roman law forbade marriages between uncles and nieces, considering them incestuous. But Agrippina managed to persuade the Senate to make a special exception, arguing that their union would benefit the state. The marriage to Claudius in the year 49 was Agrippina's masterpiece of political strategy. Claudius was already 58 years old, not particularly handsome, and known for being easily influenced. Historical accounts suggest he drooled, stammered, and limped, hardly the image of imperial majesty. But what he lacked in personal charisma, he made up for in the one quality Agrippina valued above all others. He wore the imperial purple. Within days of their marriage, Agrippina's influence was unmistakable. She received the unprecedented title of Augusta while the emperor still lived, an honor previously reserved only for the most revered imperial women after their deaths. She began appearing on coins alongside Claudius, a privilege that announced to the entire empire that she was no ordinary empress, but a co-ruler in all but name. Perhaps most impressive was how Agrippina managed to convince Claudius to adopt her son, Nero, as his heir, placing him ahead of Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. This wasn't just maternal love, it was the culmination of years of careful planning. Through this adoption, Nero became Claudius's legal son and heir, positioned to inherit the empire. The ancient historian Tacitus tells us that Agrippina would sit on a separate throne during official meetings, receiving foreign dignitaries alongside the emperor, something no Roman woman had ever done before. She even reviewed the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguards, wearing a magnificent gold-embroidered military cloak that proclaimed her authority. Agrippina's marriage to Claudius wasn't just a wedding, it was the most successful political coup in Roman history, accomplished not with swords and shields, but with ambition, intelligence, and calculated charm. In a world where women were expected to be silent ornaments to male power, Agrippina had transformed herself into the most influential person in the empire, with one hand on the throne and the other guiding her son toward imperial destiny. This is where our story takes a truly sinister turn. For all her careful planning and maneuvering, Agrippina soon faced a threat she couldn't ignore. Emperor Claudius, perhaps realizing he had been outmaneuvered, or simply missing his biological son, began showing renewed interest in young Britannicus. Small signals at first, a kind word here, a fatherly gesture there. But Agrippina recognized the warning signs immediately. Claudius started to speak openly about Britannicus coming of age soon. The boy was nearing 14, the age when Roman youths traditionally assumed the toga virilis, the toga of manhood. Once this happened, Britannicus would become a legitimate contender for the throne, potentially displacing Nero from the succession Agrippina had so carefully orchestrated. The ancient historian Tacitus tells us that Claudius, in an unguarded moment after drinking wine, muttered ominously that it was his fate to suffer the disgrace of all his wives and finally to punish them. For a woman as perceptive as Agrippina, this was no idle threat. It was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. She had come too far, sacrificed too much to watch her plans crumble now. Agrippina decided that Claudius had to die before he could undo all her work. But this would be no simple murder. It required perfect timing, careful planning, and absolute secrecy. Agrippina found her weapon in a woman named Locusta, a notorious poisoner whose skills were so renowned that she was kept in chains by imperial authorities, brought out only when her deadly expertise was needed. Through intermediaries, Agrippina secured Locusta's services for what would become history's most famous poisoning. The method was diabolically clever. Claudius was particularly fond of a type of mushroom called boletus, a delicacy in Roman cuisine. On the 13th day of October in the year 54, at a banquet in the imperial palace, Agrippina personally served her husband a dish of these mushrooms. But one specific mushroom, the largest and most appetizing, had been doctored with poison. What happened next is the subject of some historical debate. Some accounts suggest that the poison initially failed to kill Claudius, who was notorious for his excessive eating and drinking habits. Seeing that her plan might fail, Agrippina allegedly called upon Claudius's personal physician, Xenophon, who was secretly in her pay. Under the guise of helping the emperor vomit, a common practice after Roman feasts, Xenophon is said to have used a feather dipped in a fast-acting poison, inserting it into the emperor's throat and ensuring his death. Whatever the exact method, the result was the same. Emperor Claudius died that night, his body still warm as Agrippina's machinations continued. Rather than announcing his death immediately, she kept it secret, pretending the emperor was still alive but resting. This crucial delay gave her time to secure the support of the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers whose backing was essential for any smooth transition of power. She sent messengers to console Britannicus, keeping him isolated and under watch, while simultaneously arranging for Nero to be presented to the Praetorian Guard. The timing was perfect. It was noon, considered the most fortunate hour of the day by Roman superstition. With the Praetorian support secured through promises of generous donatives, monetary gifts to ensure loyalty, 17-year-old Nero was proclaimed emperor. Only after all these arrangements were in place was Claudius's death officially announced. The Senate, already accustomed to following imperial direction rather than leading, dutifully confirmed Nero as the new emperor. In a final touch of irony, Claudius was deified, made a god, on Agrippina's suggestion, allowing her to become the priestess of his cult. Nero's first speech to the Senate, written by the philosopher Seneca, promised a return to the principles of Augustus and a rejection of the abuses that had marked Claudius's reign. As he spoke these lofty words, his mother Agrippina sat behind a curtain, listening and directing from the shadows, an arrangement that shocked Roman sensibilities but perfectly symbolized the reality of power in Rome's new imperial government. At just 17 years old, Nero was now the most powerful man in the known world, but everyone understood the truth. Agrippina, daughter of Germanicus, great-granddaughter of Augustus, widow of one emperor and mother to another, was now effectively the ruler of Rome. She had completed one of history's most remarkable journeys, from exile to empress, from political pawn to kingmaker. For the moment at least, Agrippina the Younger had achieved what no woman before her had even dared to dream. Hey, did you know that Agrippina wrote her own memoirs? If you're enjoying this video, like, share and subscribe to the Legacy of Empires channel for more incredible stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, do you think Agrippina was a devoted mother or a ruthless manipulator? Agrippina's triumph was magnificent but fleeting. Power once attained must be maintained, and the young emperor she had placed on the throne was growing increasingly restless under his mother's control. The first months of Nero's reign had gone exactly as Agrippina planned. Imperial coins featured their profiles side by side, with Agrippina's name appearing alongside the emperor's, an unprecedented honor for a woman in Rome. When Nero received foreign dignitaries, his mother sat on a matching throne beside him, practically co-ruling the empire. But the dynamics of power are rarely static, especially when ambitious advisors enter the picture. Two men in particular began to drive a wedge between mother and son: Seneca, Nero's tutor and philosopher, and Burrus, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. Though initially allies of Agrippina, they gradually convinced Nero that to be a true emperor, he must rule independently of his domineering mother. The first sign of trouble came when Nero fell madly in love with a former slave named Act. Agrippina was furious, not out of moral objection, but because she couldn't control this relationship. She saw any influence over her son that didn't come from her as a direct threat to her power. When she confronted Nero about this inappropriate romance, he responded by removing her from the imperial palace. This was just the beginning. Step by step, Nero began stripping away his mother's privileges and powers. He dismissed officials loyal to her and replaced them with his own men. The imperial coins no longer featured Agrippina's image. She was no longer invited to council meetings or allowed to sit beside him during public appearances. Perhaps most humiliating was when Nero demanded the return of imperial jewels that Agrippina had been wearing, jewels that had once belonged to emperors' wives. The message was clear: she was no longer to be treated as co-ruler. Agrippina didn't surrender quietly. She began threatening to support Britannicus, Claudius's biological son, as the rightful heir to the throne. This was a dangerous gambit, and Nero responded swiftly. Just weeks before Britannicus's 14th birthday, when he would have officially become a man, the young prince collapsed at a dinner party after tasting his drink. His body turned blue, and he died within moments. Though officially declared an epileptic seizure, few doubted that Nero had poisoned his stepbrother. With Britannicus eliminated, Agrippina changed tactics. She began gathering supporters among the senators, military officers, and even the common people, reminding them of her lineage as the daughter of the beloved Germanicus. Nero, increasingly paranoid, saw conspiracies everywhere. The final break came in the year 59, 5 years into Nero's reign. By this time, Nero had fallen under the spell of his new love, Poppaea Sabina, who urged him to finally break free from his mother's influence completely. According to the historian Tacitus, it was Poppaea who convinced Nero that as long as Agrippina lived, he would never be truly emperor in his own right. After considering various plots, Nero settled on a plan of extraordinary complexity. He invited his mother to a reconciliation dinner at his villa in Baiae on the Bay of Naples. After a seemingly warm reunion, he offered to send her home by sea rather than by land. The vessel prepared for her was a magnificent ship, elaborately decorated and secretly designed to collapse on command. As Agrippina's ship sailed across the calm waters of the Bay of Naples under the light of the stars, the ceiling of her cabin suddenly collapsed, but the weights intended to crush her instead killed only her companion. The ship then began to break apart, meant to sink and drown all passengers. But Agrippina, showing remarkable presence of mind, swam to shore and made her way to her nearby villa. Understanding immediately what had happened, she sent a messenger to Nero, claiming she had survived an unfortunate accident and was safe. This message, meant to reassure her son and perhaps shame him into abandoning his murderous plan, instead sealed her fate. Nero, panicked that his mother had survived and might expose his plot, sent soldiers to her villa. The ancient writers tell us that when the centurions arrived with swords drawn, Agrippina faced them with dignity. According to Tacitus, her final words were, "Strike my womb," pointing to the belly that had carried Nero, making her end as dramatic as her life had been. The woman who had poisoned an emperor, manipulated the most powerful men in Rome, and broken countless traditions and taboos to secure power, was finally silenced. Nero publicly claimed his mother had been plotting against him and committed suicide when discovered, a transparent lie that few believed, but none dared challenge. After Agrippina's death, Nero ruled for another 9 years, his reign growing increasingly tyrannical and unstable, but he never escaped his mother's shadow. Roman historians record that he was haunted by nightmares of Agrippina, and that he avoided visiting places associated with her. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship in life continued even after her death. Agrippina's ambition and determination had shaped an emperor, even if that emperor ultimately destroyed her. Agrippina may have died on the cold marble floor of her villa, betrayed by the very son she elevated to power, but her legacy echoes through the corridors of history to this day. In a world where women were expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible in politics, Agrippina dared to seize power openly and unapologetically. What makes Agrippina's story so remarkable is not just what she achieved, but the obstacles she overcame to achieve it. Roman society in the 1st century, after Christ, was rigidly patriarchal. Women couldn't vote, hold public office, or even speak in the Senate. They were legally considered perpetual minors, always under the guardianship of a male relative. Yet Agrippina maneuvered through these restrictions like water flowing around stones, finding paths to power where none seemed possible. Her innovations in wielding feminine power were revolutionary. By having her image placed on official coins alongside Nero's, something no living Roman woman had achieved before, she established a visual precedent for female authority. When she sat beside Claudius and later Nero during official functions, she wasn't just breaking protocol, she was rewriting it, creating new possibilities for women in the imperial system. Agrippina's influence extended far beyond the political sphere. As a patron of architecture, she commissioned public works throughout the empire. She ordered the construction of a colony for veterans on the Rhine River at the site of her birth, naming it Colonia Agrippinensis, modern-day Cologne, in Germany. This city, which still bears her name 2,000 years later, remains one of her most enduring physical legacies. Her impact on Roman religion was equally significant, when she convinced the Senate to deify Claudius after his death, making herself the priestess of his cult. She created a religious platform for her continued influence. By controlling access to the divine Claudius, she maintained spiritual authority even as her political power began to wane. Agrippina's story so fascinated Roman historians that they devoted extraordinary attention to her. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio all wrote extensively about her life and schemes, treating her as a central character in the imperial drama rather than a supporting player. Even these male historians, writing in a society that viewed female ambition with suspicion and hostility, couldn't help but convey a grudging respect for her intelligence and determination. What's perhaps most interesting about Agrippina's legacy is how it influenced the women who came after her. Later, empresses studied her techniques of wielding power through proximity to male relatives, patronage networks, and careful image management. From Plotina, wife of Trajan, to Julia Domna under the Severan dynasty a century and a half later, imperial women followed the precedents Agrippina established, though usually with more subtlety and less overt ambition. Even today, Agrippina offers a case study in the exercise of power from a position of formal powerlessness. Her story reminds us that official titles and legal rights tell only part of the story of how influence actually works. Through strategic relationships, careful timing, and sheer force of will, she shaped an empire despite having no official role within it. Of course, Agrippina's legacy is complicated by the methods she employed. The poisoning of Claudius, the elimination of rivals, and her manipulation of her own son raise profound moral questions. Was she a pioneer breaking through the limitations imposed on women, or a ruthless opportunist who simply used any means available to satisfy her thirst for power? Perhaps she was both, a woman of extraordinary capability operating within a brutal political system that gave her few legitimate avenues for her ambition. It's worth noting that much of what we know about Agrippina comes from hostile male historians who viewed female political ambition as unnatural and dangerous. Their accounts likely exaggerate her crimes while minimizing her accomplishments. Her lost memoirs might have told a very different story, one of survival and determination in a world designed to exclude her from power entirely. In the end, Agrippina's greatest legacy may be the questions her life continues to raise about gender, power, and the moral costs of ambition. In a society that offered women no formal path to political influence, she created her own path through cunning, courage, and yes, cruelty when she deemed it necessary. Her story challenges us to consider how systems of power shape the methods people use to navigate them, and what price both individuals and societies pay when talent and ambition are constrained by arbitrary limitations. 2,000 years after her death, the name Agrippina still evokes the image of a woman who refused to accept the limitations of her time. A woman who understood that history belongs to those bold enough to seize it, regardless of the rules designed to hold them back. Agrippina the Younger was truly a woman ahead of her time. In an age when women were expected to remain in the background, tending to household affairs and producing heirs, she dared to reach beyond these boundaries and grasp real power. Her extraordinary journey from imperial princess to the effective ruler of Rome represents one of history's most remarkable stories of female ambition and achievement. Yet her story is also a cautionary tale. Agrippina's relentless pursuit of power led her down dark paths, conspiracy, manipulation, possible murder, and ultimately ended in her own destruction at the hands of the son she had sacrificed everything to elevate. The very qualities that made her exceptional, her ambition, her refusal to accept limitations, her unwavering determination, ultimately sowed the seeds of her downfall. What makes Agrippina so fascinating to us today is that she defies simple moral categorization. Was she a feminist pioneer, breaking through barriers that confined women of her era? Or was she a ruthless manipulator who used anyone, even her own child, to satisfy her thirst for power? The ancient sources present her primarily as a villain, but we must remember these accounts were written by men who viewed female ambition as inherently unnatural and threatening. Perhaps the most honest assessment lies somewhere in between these extremes. Agrippina was a product of her environment, the brutal, high-stakes world of imperial Roman politics where power was everything and mercy was weakness. She played the game as she had learned it, watching her own family members destroy each other in the quest for dominance. In such a world, her methods seem less an aberration than an adaptation. What's truly remarkable is that despite being written out of official histories, despite attempts to erase her memory after her death, Agrippina's story has endured. From the banks of the Rhine, where Cologne still bears her name, to the museums where her coins are displayed, she refuses to be forgotten. Even 2,000 years after her death, she continues to fascinate us with her complexity. Neither saint nor monster, but a woman of extraordinary capability, navigating an almost impossibly hostile system. In studying figures like Agrippina, we're reminded that history isn't a simple tale of heroes and villains, but a complex tapestry of human ambition, circumstance, and choice. Her story challenges us to question how we judge historical figures, especially women who operated under constraints we can barely imagine today. So, was Agrippina a hero or a villain? Perhaps she was both, and neither. She was, above all, a survivor who refused to be defined by the limitations of her time. Her life stands as testimony to both the heights that ambition can reach and the terrible price it sometimes demands. If you've enjoyed this exploration of one of history's most fascinating women, please hit the like button and share this video with anyone interested in ancient history, powerful women, or the darker side of imperial Rome. Subscribe to the Legacy of Empires channel for more deep dives into the compelling figures who shaped our past. We're constantly exploring the complex characters whose ambitions, virtues, and flaws created the world we inhabit today. Until next time, remember that history's greatest lessons often come from its most controversial figures.